Drea again from Dragon Consulting, and today I want to talk about our last video in the Workarounds series. So this one is on operational activities. So previous videos have been about some key reasons individuals create workarounds in the healthcare environment, impacts that can be seen from those workarounds, as well as some assessment questions and evaluation questions when you're trying to determine if the workaround is positive or negative. So if you hadn't had a chance to see those previous videos, then take a look at those ones as soon as you're done with this, and we'll get started on the operational activities. So again, just as a reminder that we're using the definition of a workaround as an alternative path to accomplishing a task or a series of tasks that differs from a designed or intended process. And the assumption that is being made throughout these is that that designed and intended process is actually documented and has been agreed to. So the creation and use of workarounds can occur at any point in time. They are not always found immediately after an implementation. They're not necessarily sort of targeted around periods of time in the year or in a cycle. So it's important that we actually have operational processes in place for the discovery, the use, and the remedy of workarounds if necessary. So some key processes related to workarounds that you'll want to consider. So I've got 4 that I would like to talk about, and they're listed on the screen in front of you, and we'll go into them in a bit more detail. So notification. One of the most important processes to put in place is to have a safe process for staff to communicate the use of or the desire for workarounds to leadership and IT contact points. So when I say safe, I mean users need to feel that coming forward with a workaround isn't going to immediately result in reprimand. So they need to understand that the process for notification is going to result in an evaluation and an assessment. It is not something that is meant to sort of be whistleblowing and punitive in nature. It is meant to open the lines of communication and have sort of some collaborative assessments done and to take a look at areas of opportunity. So that's what I mean by safe. So you will want to create a centralized location to document the workflows that are brought forward once you've been notified, and that's so that you can keep track of who's actually performing them, who's been notified, and if there are any components along the way that you need to gather more information on, or if there's any gaps, you can sort of align those if you've got them documented in a single place. And you'll also want to follow up with a collaborative evaluation. So as I mentioned, you want the process to be safe. You want the communication to sort of flow back and forth. So you're going to want to follow up on those components. So right in line with notification, you will want to set up a communication process. So the communication process should inform users of relevant information that relates to workarounds. So there are going to be times when a workaround is actually required or necessary due to system issues. Downtime, for example, requires workarounds to be put in place if system functionality isn't working, if there are some changes that need to be made and they're not quite done yet. There may be workarounds that you can use in the meantime. There's also going to be a need for communicating relevant information about workarounds once they've been discovered. So if workarounds are in use and you don't wish for them to be continued, you'll need communication processes to actually get the correct information out there, to make sure that there's a pathway for dialogue so that everyone understands. And you'll just want to keep those lines of communication open and well understood. So communication is huge, not just for workarounds, but for everything in healthcare IT. So next is evaluation. So as I discussed in the last post, you'll actually want to have a rapid operational process for evaluating workarounds. So once you've created a safe environment for people to come forward with, you want to make sure that you have a plan and a process in place to actually take a look at those workflows and quickly determine, or as quickly as possible, determine whether they're positive or negative, and whether they are something that you would like to expand and proliferate, or if there's something that you sort of want to get a handle of and shift communication and training to sort of stop and have a different workflow be performed. So you'll need to include all the appropriate stakeholders so that each component can be reviewed. So you'll want to look at regulatory and policy. You'll want to look at sort of any technical issues that could occur. You'll also want to look at process efficiency and outcomes to make sure that when you do the evaluation, it's actually holistic and it's not just one component. So in the evaluation, you do want to include a process to roll out positive workarounds on a larger scale if that's deemed to be what you want to do, and that needs to tie into your communication plan. You also need to make sure there's steps in place and that you have sort of communication triggers and education triggers that are going to occur if you determine a workflow to be unfavorable, and then you need an alternative pathway to be followed fairly quickly. So the last one that we'll talk about from an operational perspective with respect to workflows is education. So you do want to have a process for educating users on the desired actions to take. There may be an opportunity to incorporate this into some of your existing training activities. So if you have quick tips, lunch and learns, flyers that go out, things like that, you may be able to incorporate some of the workaround education or workflow process education in that, or you may need to initiate one-offs. So if it is just targeted at a small group of users, it's not relevant to the whole organization, you may want one-off communications or one-off education sessions. And if you've got a workflow that's actually a workaround that in a widespread capacity, so you have a significant one that you want to change or a significant one that you want to roll out, then you may want one-offs for those as well. You may not want to roll them in because they need a little bit more attention. So as you're working through everything, as always, you'll need to document stuff and create material for any useful tips and tricks that can assist with the workflows for use in the communication path that you're doing related to this, as well as for your ongoing operations. So you want to make sure that you're updating the workflows appropriately to account for any workarounds that have been discovered. If you're going to go down a path of communicating to users and retraining them on things, you want to make sure that ongoing operational training and new hire training and things like that will also mention the same thing. So you want to adjust all those accordingly. So education is a big one. And that's going to be it for my workaround sort of discussion for this series. So if you have discovered that a workaround is in place, or if a workaround is being considered, please keep in mind it's important to communicate that to the appropriate individuals. So that may include representatives from clinical departments, from IT, or from leadership groups. So depending on what workaround is being done, what stage you're at in making a determination or considering a workaround, as well as sort of where the evaluation is. And hesitancy in communicating sort of the use of or the discovery of workarounds can actually result in some long-term workflow impacts. So we don't want there to be cascading effects without communication and dialogue occurring. So over time, if that happens, and if they do sort of start to snowball and get out of control and not enough people know about them, they can become increasingly difficult to manage. And as I mentioned in the impacts video, you end up with testing scripts and training scenarios and things that are very misaligned, and you may have some cascading impacts down the road. So communication is key, and working together is huge. All right. Thanks, everyone.